My grandson mocked me in public. He had no idea I owned the place. When I moved into my son's house in Charleston, South Carolina, it was meant to be temporary. After my knee surgery, Jason insisted. He said I shouldn't be alone during recovery. Amber, his wife, nodded with a smile too smooth to be sincere. She showed me the guest room, a small, windowless space tucked between the laundry closet and the garage door. "You'll be more comfortable here," she said, her hand grazing the light switch like a hostess rehearsing a tour. I thanked her. I had just sold my cottage, a white clapboard place with creaky floorboards and a porch that smelled like pine after rain, to cover my medical bills and help with their mortgage. The first weeks passed gently. I folded laundry with the hum of the dryer behind me, stirred pasta sauce on weekday evenings, and read stories to Mason, their son, when Amber had calls or Jason stayed late. Mason was polite. Distant. He once asked if I knew how to play Minecraft and didn't wait for the answer. But he always said thank you when I brought him his snack. They let me do things, which at first felt like inclusion. But soon I realized they let me do them because they wouldn't. Then, one morning while I was wiping crumbs off the counter, I heard Amber's voice drift down the hall. She was on the phone, I think, but speaking low, the kind of tone you use when you don't want to be overheard. "She's useful," she said. A soft laugh. "But God help us if she stays too long." The cloth paused in my hand. The countertop already clean. I stared at the laminate edge for a long moment, then folded the cloth and laid it by the sink. That was the first crack. The one that didn't make a sound, but made the air colder. It began slowly, like rust creeping over the edge of something once polished. Amber stopped saying good morning. Not out of malice, just a quiet recalibration, like I'd become furniture she no longer needed to acknowledge. Jason still smiled, sometimes. But it was the kind of smile you give out of habit, not warmth. One afternoon, while I was unloading groceries I'd paid for, Amber paused in the doorway and said, "Next time, could you check the sugar content on Mason's yogurt?" I tried to keep him on a routine. I nodded. She didn't wait for a reply. Later that week, she left a list on the counter. It wasn't a request. Just a neatly written schedule: laundry rotation, vacuuming, pick-up reminders. No please, no thank you. Just tasks. Jason chuckled when I mentioned it. "She's a little type A," he said, sipping from a mug I had washed. He didn't ask if it bothered me. The small humiliations layered in after that. At dinner one night, I served my casserole, the one Jason used to ask for every birthday. Amber took one bite and said, without looking up, "I hope you didn't use too much garlic again." Jason didn't say anything. Mason wrinkled his nose. "Why do old people always make weird food?" I let the comment pass. Children repeat what they hear. Another evening, as I rinsed dishes, Jason chatted with a neighbor in the driveway. I heard the words float through the open kitchen window, light as smoke. "We've got a live-in nanny/maid. It's working out." They laughed. I smiled too, because smiling was easier than explaining what hurt sounds like when you've grown used to swallowing it. Even Mason began to shift. He used to sit beside me during his cartoons. Now he preferred his room. Once, when I asked how school was, he rolled his eyes and said, "Fine," in the clipped way teenagers do when they're too old for small talk and too young to know kindness matters. I told myself I didn't mind. I was there to recover. I was grateful for the roof over my head. But something in me started to retreat. I began folding my clothes in the guest room with the door closed. I kept my voice down during phone calls. I waited until the kitchen was empty before I brewed my tea. I became careful not to leave signs of my presence. Then came the fundraiser. Mason's private school was hosting a gala. Amber mentioned it offhandedly, assuming I wouldn't go. But Jason said I should. "It'll be nice for Mom to get out," he added, like I was a stray that needed fresh air. I dressed carefully. A navy blouse, pressed slacks, the earrings James gave me for our 40th. I thought I looked presentable, dignified. At the event, I stayed close to the perimeter, smiling politely. The principal greeted me warmly. "You must be Mason's grandmother. So lovely to meet you." I opened my mouth to respond, but Mason beat me to it. "She's just the help," he said. "My parents let her live with us because she has nowhere else to go." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. It was worse, casual. Jason chuckled. Amber sipped her wine. No one corrected him. No one said I was family. No one said I mattered. I stood there, still as a statue, while the wine glasses clinked and the music swelled. They had no idea. No idea that before my surgery, before the sale of my cottage, before I moved into that back guest room, I once owned the development company that built this school. That I signed the permits, hired the contractors, approved the blueprints. That I stood in this very gym years ago with a hard hat and a clipboard, imagining the children who would one day walk these halls, including, unknowingly, my own grandson. I stayed quiet the rest of the evening. I didn't say goodbye. I took a lift home and let myself into the darkened house, my keys still on the ring they never used. The next morning, I woke early, as usual. I made coffee, packed Mason's lunch, scrambled eggs. Amber swept in, glanced at the kitchen, and said nothing. Jason offered a distracted "Thanks, Mom," as he tied his tie. Then they left. The silence that followed felt strangely kind. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and sat at the small desk in the corner of my room. There, beneath a stack of old tax folders and medical records, was the lockbox I'd brought from my cottage. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were documents. Deeds. Certificates. A blue folder with my investment accounts. A sealed envelope from my lawyer. I placed everything on the bed and began sorting. Slowly. Deliberately. When the sun rose fully, I had made a list. Not of revenge. Of withdrawal. That afternoon, I walked to Riverbend Cafe, a cheerful little place with chalkboard menus and mismatched chairs. Mason had once spilled a milkshake there and laughed when I bent down to clean it. They didn't know, of course, that I owned it. I had bought the cafe years ago, quietly, after the previous owner wanted out. It wasn't a profitable venture, but I liked the atmosphere. I liked that they let me read there without rushing me. I liked the kindness of the staff. Today, I met with my lawyer at that cafe. He didn't ask why I was making the changes. He just nodded as I slid the documents across the table. We revised my will. Removed Jason and Amber. Established a trust for Mason, conditional. He would inherit only if he maintained a documented relationship with me. No contact, no access. The trust would sit quietly, waiting for either a change of heart or the passage of time. I also signed the paperwork to purchase their house. Technically, it was still mortgaged, but Jason had used my funds, from the cottage sale, to make the down payment. It took little effort to take over the loan, add my name to the deed, and begin the process of silent reclamation. The barista, a young man named Theo, brought us coffee. He was always kind. Always patient. I looked at him a moment longer than usual and made a mental note. He'll be manager soon. The papers were signed, the plan in motion. Still, I returned to their house, my house now, each evening as if nothing had changed. I made dinner, folded towels, loaded the dishwasher. I wore my silence like armor. Jason and Amber didn't notice the difference. Or if they did, they mistook it for surrender. "Mom, can you pick up Mason from soccer on Thursday?" Jason called from upstairs one morning. I said yes. I always said yes. Amber left another list on the counter. Grocery items this time, with her initials at the bottom as if she were issuing a company memo. They thought they were managing me. But I had already left, quietly, inside. 3 weeks after the fundraiser, they went away for a spa weekend. Amber's birthday, I believe. Mason stayed with a friend, and I had the house to myself. I didn't cook that weekend. I didn't clean. I opened the windows and let the air move through the rooms. I walked barefoot on the kitchen tile. I sat on the porch in the evening light, sipping the wine I'd bought for myself, and thought about how long I'd lived in other people's spaces, first as a daughter, then a wife, then a mother. How each role had carved me into something smaller, more palatable. This would be the last time I folded myself into someone else's version of me. Monday morning, Jason and Amber returned. I greeted them with tea and banana bread. We sat on the back patio like a family. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. By Wednesday, everything was finalized. I had copies of the updated deed, the trust documents, the bank letter confirming transfer of ownership. My lawyer, precise and efficient, had even drafted a formal notice. I printed 3 copies. One for Jason. One for Amber. One for myself. I waited until dinner. We sat at the table. Chicken. Roasted potatoes. The kind of meal I'd made 100 times without acknowledgement. After Mason excused himself, I placed the envelope between their plates. "What's this?" Jason asked. Amber opened hers first. Her smile froze halfway. Jason's brow furrowed. "Is this a joke?" "No," I said gently. "You'll have 45 days to relocate. I'll be moving into a condo across town." "You're bluffing," Amber said, voice sharp now. "You can't just buy our house out from under us." Jason stood abruptly. "Why would you do this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm simply reclaiming what was already mine." Mason wandered in at that moment, confused by the tension. "What's going on?" he asked. Jason looked at me. "Tell him. Tell him what you've done." I turned to Mason and said, "I've arranged for you to have a trust fund when you're older. But it comes with a condition." "What condition?" he asked, eyes wide. "That you maintain a relationship with me. It doesn't have to be frequent. Just honest." He nodded slowly, not quite understanding. "I thought you didn't even have a job." "I had a life," I said. Amber hissed through her teeth. "You're doing this for revenge." "No," I said. "I'm doing this because I was never part of your story. Only the funding." Jason's shoulders sagged. "We needed help. That's all." "You got it," I said. "But help is not the same as ownership. And you don't get to keep both my savings and your condescension." He tried to speak, but I had already stood up. "I'll be leaving in the morning," I said. "Theo will stop by this weekend to discuss repairs. He'll be managing the place." Amber's face twisted. "Theo?" "The barista," I said. "At Riverbend Cafe." They stared at me as if I had just told them the sun was upside down. I gathered my dishes, rinsed them carefully, and left them to dry. The next morning, I packed lightly. They didn't come down to say goodbye. Mason watched from the window, his hand pressed to the glass. I gave a small wave. I didn't expect him to wave back. But he did. The condo was smaller than the house, but it felt vast to me, vast in the way silence feels after years of being talked over. There were 3 windows in the main room, each letting in generous light. I hung linen curtains, pale and soft. I arranged my books by color, something I'd always wanted to do. I bought a teapot with a ceramic bird on the lid, and each morning, I brewed a cup and sat by the window while the light shifted slowly across the rug. No lists. No closed doors. No strained thank yous. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time. My knees ached, but I didn't mind. I took breaks. I watered the rosemary and basil I had planted in 2 large terracotta pots on the balcony. I didn't rush. There was no one rushing me. At night, I slept with the window cracked open, letting the coastal air breathe through the space. I was alone, but not lonely. I saw Theo again at the cafe a week later. He brought over my coffee without waiting for an order. You look different, he said. Do I? Lighter. I smiled. He told me the cafe was doing well, and he was excited about the promotion. Didn't know you were the owner, he added sheepishly. No one did, I said. That was the point. He nodded slowly. Well, thanks for believing in me. I looked at him carefully. He couldn't have been more than 25. Earnest, respectful, unpolished in a way that made you trust him more. It wasn't belief, I said. It was observation. He grinned and walked back behind the counter. After that, I went there every Sunday morning. Brought a book. Stayed 2 hours. Tipped generously. Sat near the window. Once, a mother came in with her teenage daughter. They argued softly about whether to get decaf or not. The girl rolled her eyes in that exaggerated way only a child can when she's too comfortable. I watched them a while. Then turned back to my book. Weeks passed. Letters came. The first was from Mason. The envelope was slightly crooked, the ink smudged. He had drawn a little sun in the corner. Inside, the note read, Dear Grandma. I'm sorry I laughed. I didn't mean it. Can I visit you sometime? He had signed it with his full name and a crooked heart. I sat at the table with the letter in my hands for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer marked maybe. A second letter arrived days later. From Amber. This one was printed. No handwriting. It began with an apology. Then turned into a plea. Then spiraled into anger, accusations, guilt, a few veiled threats about family unity and betrayal. I read it once. Then burned it. Jason didn't write. But I saw his name pop up on my phone occasionally. Missed calls. A few vague messages. One said, Mom, we need to talk. Another said, can we just clear the air? I didn't reply. Clearing the air is easy when you're the one who polluted it. Instead, I focused on my new routines. I joined a women's shelter as a volunteer. They needed someone to help with budgeting workshops. I brought my old spreadsheets, taught basic savings strategies, explained interest rates in simple terms. Most of the women were younger than I'd expected. Some barely into their 30s. Their eyes held the same wariness I used to see in my mirror. I never told them my full story. I didn't need to. One woman, her name was Camille, stayed after class one day. You talk like someone who knows what it's like, she said quietly. I do, I replied. She nodded and didn't ask more. I liked that. I liked the calm. And I liked that when I returned home each day, my apartment was just as I had left it. One afternoon, I received a certified letter forwarded from the old address. From a law office I didn't recognize. Inside, a document, a formal petition from Jason and Amber, requesting reconsideration of the trust terms and will structure. They had hired a lawyer. I exhaled slowly. The next morning, I met with mine. He read the document, closed the folder, and looked at me. They don't have a case, he said. I know. But they might still try to create noise. I know, I repeated. Do you want to respond? I thought for a moment. Then shook my head. No. Let them spend their money. I'm done spending my piece. He smiled. That's becoming a rare currency these days. The condo grew into itself over time. Little by little, it became mine, not just in ownership, but in feeling. I rearranged the furniture. Bought a second-hand rocking chair with faded cushions and a gentle creak. I kept fresh lemons in a glass bowl on the counter, even though I only used them once a week. They reminded me of summer, and I liked how the light hit them in the afternoon. On Thursdays, I walked to the small bookstore 3 blocks down. The clerk there, Margaret, always wore 2 pairs of reading glasses on a chain and hummed while she stacked the shelves. You're back, she said one day. I am. Looking for anything in particular? No, I said. Just trying to remember what it feels like to want something. She didn't press. Some days, I sat in the reading nook and watched other people walk in. A young man looking for cookbooks. A grandmother choosing a birthday story for her grandson. An older couple arguing quietly over whether they already owned a certain paperback. I liked watching them more than I liked reading sometimes. They didn't know who I was. Didn't expect anything from me. I was invisible again, but this time on my terms. At night, I kept a notebook by my bed. I started writing short sentences, just fragments of memory, pieces of self I thought I'd lost. Things like the smell of rain on concrete. Jason's first lost tooth. The way he handed it to me, palm sweaty, eyes wide. I used to hum when I ironed clothes. I didn't write about the fundraiser. Or the envelope at dinner. Or Amber's voice saying she hoped I didn't use too much garlic. Some things didn't deserve the ink. A month passed with no new letters. Mason's remained in the drawer. Then came a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Mason stood there. Taller than I remembered. Holding a small paper bag. I was at the cafe, he said. Theo said you live nearby. I stepped back slowly, wordless. I got you something, he added, holding out the bag. It's just a cookie. The kind you used to make. Oatmeal raisin. I took it. We sat on the balcony. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea. He didn't speak right away. Then finally. I didn't mean it. What I said at the fundraiser. I nodded. I was trying to sound cool. And I didn't really understand. And now? I asked. He looked down at the cookie. Broke it in half. I guess. I think I do now. We sat in silence for a long while. He didn't ask about the house. Or the trust. Or his parents. I didn't offer details. I miss you, he said finally. I miss you too, I replied. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. Can I come again sometime? Maybe, I said, echoing the word from his letter. His shoulders dropped just slightly, relieved. He waved once before heading down the hall. That night, I moved his letter from the maybe drawer to the kitchen corkboard. The next day, Amber called twice. Then Jason. I turned the phone over on its face and let the sound pass like wind. On Sunday, Theo mentioned they'd come into the cafe asking questions. They seemed stressed, he said with a careful shrug. I imagine they are, I said. He nodded. You want me to stop giving out your address? I looked at him for a moment, then smiled. Yes, please. He grinned. Already done. I gave him a raise that week. Quietly. He didn't notice until payday. I kept volunteering at the shelter. Camille, who had stayed after class that day, asked if I would help her open a small bakery stall at the weekend market. She had a recipe for almond tarts passed down from her grandmother and a small inheritance she was afraid to mismanage. I told her I'd help. We drew up a simple plan. I offered to cover her licensing fees and booth deposit. No strings, I said. Just repay me if and when you can. She cried. I didn't. My giving had changed. I was no longer pouring myself into people who saw me as a faucet. I was watering something smaller, but real. That Saturday, I baked lemon squares for her stall. Camille sold out by noon. I stayed until 2, pretending to reorganize the tablecloth while she greeted customers. Jason's name came up in the news briefly that week. Something about a misfiled inspection report at work. Amber's real estate firm pulled 2 listings, citing internal conflicts. I didn't read the details. I just turned the page and stirred my tea. When you stop being someone's resource, they either rage or unravel. I had seen both. I had stopped reacting to either. On my birthday, Margaret from the bookstore left a wrapped package at my door. A hardcover copy of a novel I'd once mentioned in passing. Inside, a note, "You have a presence. Thank you for letting us see it." I sat on the couch and read the entire book in one sitting. The ending made me cry. Not because it was sad, but because someone in it finally chose themselves. The way I had. The condo had settled into its own rhythm by now, quiet, deliberate. The plants on the balcony bloomed with more green than flower, but I didn't mind. There was something soothing about the consistency of leaves, their refusal to perform for attention. Camille's bakery stall continued to do well. Each week, she introduced a new item. Shortbread dipped in dark chocolate. Pecan twists. Tiny apple crumbles that reminded me of the ones I used to make in a different kitchen, for people who no longer sent messages unless they wanted answers. Camille started calling me Missy. Not grandma, not ma'am. Just Missy. It was strange at first, strange and freeing. One morning, she showed up with a cloth-covered box. "For you," she said. No reason. Inside were 4 almond tarts, each marked with a little paper flag that said peace. "I didn't know which flavor you'd like," she added shyly. "I like them all," I said, and meant it. I had started sleeping with the bedroom door open, something I hadn't done in years. In the house, I'd always closed it out of habit, or maybe self-preservation. Here, the open door didn't feel like vulnerability. It felt like permission. I had removed the last of the photographs from my drawers. Not out of bitterness. Just clarity. The ones with smiles that no longer meant anything, the vacation pictures where I stood slightly outside the frame, all of them packed away. They didn't belong on these new walls. One evening, I received a letter. Not from Mason. Not from Jason or Amber. From a lawyer I hadn't used before. Inside, a petition. Amber was attempting to contest the house purchase, citing undue influence and familial coercion. It would never hold. My lawyer confirmed as much the next morning. Still, it stung. Not the legal move. But the wording. Coercion. As if decades of giving, of folding myself small for their convenience, could now be reframed as manipulation, because I finally said no. I wrote no reply. But I kept the envelope. Something about the embossed firm name, the formal weight of the paper, it reminded me how people reveal themselves when their comfort is threatened. Later that week, Mason showed up again. This time with a sketchbook. He sat on the floor of the balcony, cross-legged, while I watered the basil. "I'm drawing people now," he said. "Faces. I don't know why." "You don't need a reason." He flipped it open and showed me a drawing of his friend. Then another, his art teacher. Then a sketch of me. Not smiling. Just sitting with my hand around a teacup. "I drew it from memory," he said. "It was good." "I've been thinking," he added. "I know I don't deserve your trust. But I'd like to earn it." I didn't answer right away. The wind picked up slightly. The basil leaves trembled. Then I said, "You don't need to be perfect. Just present." He nodded. He came back the next Saturday. Amber called that night. 3 times. I didn't answer. The 4th time, she left a voicemail. "This isn't fair," she said. "You've poisoned him against us." Poisoned. I laughed, quietly, bitterly. No. I had offered him space. The only thing I was ever denied. Later that month, a card arrived from Jason. No envelope. Just a card tucked under my doormat. It was unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "I don't know how we got here. I hope you're well." That was all. I left it on the kitchen table. The next morning, I folded it in half and used it as a bookmark. In the shelter, Camille asked if she could hire someone part-time. A woman named Nina, mid-30s, 3 kids, trying to finish her GED. I said yes. I asked nothing more. Trust was not a gift. It was a gesture. The women started calling it Missy's Corner. The spot by the back door where the sun hit just right, where I always sat for the first 10 minutes of every class, sipping weak coffee and letting them arrive in their own time. Theo stopped by the condo once, dropping off some paperwork for the cafe's expansion. He looked around quietly, then said, "It feels like you." I smiled. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. He handed me a small potted succulent. "For the windowsill," he said. "Thank you." He stood there a moment longer, then added, "You ever think about opening another cafe?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "I think about resting." He laughed. "Fair enough." We said nothing else. The next day, Mason brought over a notebook of poems. One had a line that stopped me cold. "She left quietly, not to be missed, but to be remembered correctly." He didn't ask me what I thought of it. And I didn't tell him how perfectly he'd captured the end of something that had no beginning in words. By August, the days slowed into a kind of stillness I hadn't known I needed. Heat shimmered on the pavement, the basil leaned heavy in its pot, and I stopped using the alarm clock altogether. I woke when the light reached the wall above the bookshelf, that soft, steady beam that made the wallpaper seem painted fresh. Camille brought Nina by one Tuesday afternoon. "She's nervous," Camille whispered in the entryway. "Doesn't like asking for help." I said, "She's not asking. She's beginning." Nina sat in the corner with her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweatshirt, even though it was warm. I made us all tea, placed it on the table without fanfare. She didn't say much. Just watched. And when she left, she smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. That was enough. I started keeping a drawer labeled spare. Inside, I placed small bills, prepaid cards, envelopes with stamps, spare pens, and paper. Not for emergencies, just for those moments when someone, maybe even me, needed a little edge of dignity restored. Mason came over more often now. Not with apologies. Not to explain. He came with questions. What was Dad like when he was a kid? Did you always want to run your own business? What did Grandpa smell like? That last one undid me a little. I said, "He smelled like cedar and peppermint." He carried peppermints in his pocket, and he'd sand the porch steps every spring. Mason smiled. Wrote something down in his notebook. He was quiet like that. Observant. Amber sent one final letter. Not angry this time. Just distant. She wrote that she and Jason were going to try counseling. That Mason had changed. That everything had changed. That she didn't recognize their life anymore. At the end, she wrote, "I suppose it all started when you moved in." I folded the letter once, then again, until it was small enough to fit beneath the coaster on my nightstand. I never read it again, but I liked the weight of it there, something quietly pinned beneath the shape of something useful. Mason once asked me what it meant to forgive someone. I said, "Sometimes, it's choosing not to hand them more of your silence." He nodded. "So, do you forgive them?" "I haven't decided yet." There was no bitterness in his face. Just understanding. "Do I have to choose sides?" he asked once. "No," I said. "You just have to remember who you are." We began walking together on Sundays. Around the neighborhood, then through the park. He pointed out things I never noticed: new graffiti on a bench, a bird nest under a stop sign, a hairline crack in the sidewalk that formed the shape of a tree. One Sunday, as we passed the cafe, Theo waved from inside. "Your grandson's sharp," he told me later. "He sees things," I replied. "That's rare. Especially in families." I smiled but said nothing. At the shelter, Camille and Nina brought in a third woman. Then a fourth. Word had spread. Not about me, just about the space. The quiet. The way we let people arrive without making them perform their pain. They began leaving notes on the bulletin board. Not big things, just phrases. "Still here. Paid my phone bill this month." Didn't cry when he texted. I started adding one each week myself. Made tea with no one watching. Laughed alone and didn't feel stupid. Remembered my husband's favorite song. The board grew crowded. The women joked about expanding. I told them the only thing I'd invest in again was my own peace. Camille said, "You say that like it's new." I said, "It is." Sometimes, I'd find myself standing at the window with the light falling just so, thinking of the guest room back in that house. The one by the laundry. No windows. No space for breath. They still lived there. I knew because the bank statements stopped arriving. Because my lawyer confirmed the transfer had gone through, and the name on the mortgage had changed. The house was no longer mine, but it never really was, not while I lived in it. Still, I left behind a copy of the deed. Not with them. With the shelter. Just in case someone someday needed to know how stories could be rewritten. Mason started a sketch series of places he remembered from childhood. I was in 3 of them. Not as the focus, just part of the background. A chair in a corner. A hand on a windowsill. A bowl of fruit on a table. I liked that. I didn't need to be the center of things. I just wanted to be seen as part of them. He came to the condo one day with something wrapped in butcher paper. "I want you to have this," he said. It was a portrait, me, seated on the balcony, basil in bloom beside me, my eyes looking slightly away. "You didn't ask me to pose," I said. "You never needed to," he replied. I hung it in the hallway. The light hits it differently depending on the time of day. Sometimes, it looks like I'm about to speak. Sometimes, it looks like I already have. Autumn crept in gently, without announcement. The heat softened. Leaves in the park browned slowly, more from habit than performance. I bought a warmer throw blanket for the couch and began using the heavier teapot. The basil died. The rosemary didn't. Mason started high school that fall. He visited less often, but never disappeared. Sometimes just for 10 minutes. Sometimes to sit on the balcony and eat toast. No words, no plans, just presence. One evening, he brought over an essay from his literature class. "Can you read it?" he asked, eyes flicking down to the pages as he slid them across the table. It was about regret. About a moment he couldn't take back. About a person he now saw differently. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. When I finished, I looked at him and said only, "Thank you for writing it." He shrugged. It was overdue. I placed the pages in my top drawer. Later that night, I moved them to the same envelope as his first letter, the one with the crooked sun in the corner. He never asked if I forgave him again. He didn't need to. He had already made space. At the shelter, Nina began leading one of the sessions. She had a quiet confidence now, the kind that didn't need approval to feel real. Camille kept the books and started talking about a full cafe stall, maybe a name, maybe a logo. They called the project Missy's Table, even though I told them not to. I wasn't looking for a legacy. Just a corner. In November, I received a call from Jason. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was different. Not angry. Not polished. Just tired. "Mom, I know we got things wrong. I miss Mason. He talks about you all the time. I don't expect anything. I wanted to say thank you. For what you gave. For what you didn't say." I saved the message. Didn't respond. The truth is, I no longer needed to be heard by them. I had stopped auditioning for a role they never planned to cast me in properly. Theo dropped by with updates on the cafe expansion, small successes, small setbacks. We sat at the counter once, him sketching budgets on a napkin, me circling items with a red pen. He looked at me finally and said, "You ever miss it? Business?" "No," I said. "But I remember it. The way you remember being strong even when you no longer need to be." He nodded. "That makes sense. I left him the name of a lawyer who could help with the permits. One afternoon, I visited the market early. Camille's stall had expanded. She had hired Nina's oldest daughter to run the register. There was a sign now, painted in soft lettering, Missy's Table. I smiled but said nothing. Camille handed me a warm tart and said, "You started this." "I just showed up," I said. "Exactly." A week before Thanksgiving, a package arrived at my door. No name, no note, just a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside, a photo album. Each page held pictures I hadn't seen in years, some from Mason, clearly. Some from old frames. Some I didn't remember taking at all. Near the back, there was a recent one, me, sitting on the balcony, taken from the sidewalk below. The caption beneath in Mason's handwriting read, "She stepped out of the story, but she never disappeared." I placed the album on the lowest shelf, beneath the tea tins. Thanksgiving came quietly. Mason had dinner with Jason and Amber but texted afterward. "I told them thank you. And that I'm spending Sunday with you. I hope that's okay." I replied, "Of course." That Sunday, we made soup together. Mason chopped slowly. I stirred gently. We said little. Halfway through the meal, he asked, "Are you happy now?" I looked around the room. At the rosemary. At the clean mugs. At the portrait on the wall. "I am," I said. "Not always. But often." He nodded, then said, "I want to do that too. Make space where I can be okay." I placed my hand over his on the table. His fingers had grown longer. His knuckles still knobby. "You're already doing it," I said. When he left that evening, I watched from the window. His frame, just slightly hunched under his hoodie, moved down the sidewalk with purpose. Not running. Not fleeing. Just returning to a different kind of home. As the days shortened, I found myself writing less in the notebook. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because so much had already been said in the quiet, the way tea cooled in silence, the way the sun crept across the wood floor, the way forgiveness felt like setting down something heavy you didn't know you'd been carrying. The final note I left on the shelter board was simple. I stayed. The cold came slowly, then all at once, sharp air curling through the screens, mornings dipped in frost. I unpacked the heavier quilt, the one I'd folded tightly in the back of the linen closet when I first moved in. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Mason came by less often once December settled in. "Finals," he said. "Projects." But he still called, short calls, sometimes only 2 minutes long. He'd describe a class assignment or something strange he'd seen on the bus. I didn't say much. He never rushed to end the call. I found comfort in the little ways he stayed tethered. Camille's bakery began offering delivery through a local service. Nina's daughter managed the orders. I placed one every Friday, more for them than for me. The boxes always came with a note, "Thank you for everything, Miss E." One night, long after I'd turned off the lights, I sat up in bed and felt something shift. Not pain. Not fear. Just a certainty that the life I had now was no longer a pause or a retreat. It was real. Fully formed. Mine. The next morning, I began sorting through my keepsake box. I didn't burn photos. I didn't tear up letters. But I did let go. The picture from Jason's wedding, I placed it in a padded envelope and tucked it deep into a drawer marked closed. The baby bracelet Jason wore when he came home from the hospital, I wrapped it in a silk cloth and gave it to Mason the next time he visited. "This was your dad's," I said. He took it carefully. "Do you want me to give it back to him?" "No," I said. "I want you to hold it. If you choose to. If not, let it rest somewhere safe." He nodded and didn't ask questions. The next weekend, he brought a friend by. A quiet boy named Elias who stood too straight and spoke too politely. Mason introduced us like we'd met before. "He's helping me with a writing project," he said. "We're doing a zine." A what? A tiny magazine, Elias offered. We're interviewing people about how they rebuild things. Lives. Spaces. That kind of stuff. I looked at Mason. We want to interview you, he said, then added, quickly, only if you want to. I said I'd think about it. That night, I sat with their questions spread out on the table. When did you know it was time to begin again? What does peace feel like in the body? How do you decide who to forgive? I didn't write answers. I baked lemon bread and left it cooling on the counter. When they arrived the next afternoon, I offered them each a slice, poured warm cider, and told them they could ask anything they wanted, but I wouldn't promise to answer. Mason smiled. That's fair. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I said little. But when I did, Elias wrote quickly. His pen never paused. At one point, he asked, do you think healing always involves loss? I looked at the empty teacup in front of me, at the sun slanting through the balcony door. Yes, I said. But not always regret. They left quietly, both carrying extra slices wrapped in foil. I stood at the window long after they were gone, not watching, just thinking. The next week, Elias returned with a printed copy of the zine. He'd titled the section about me, The Story She Didn't Owe Us. I placed it beside Mason's drawing on the hallway table. In late January, I received a handwritten letter. The envelope bore Jason's handwriting, but the return address was different, a rented apartment across town. I opened it without hurry. Inside, a short note. We've moved. Things are quieter now. I'm learning to hear myself again. Mason seems lighter. Thank you for making the hard choice. It freed all of us, even if we didn't want it to. There was no signature. I read it twice, then tucked it into the front flap of my notebook. Not forgiven. Not forgotten. Just recorded. Theo stopped by to share plans for the cafe's new location. Bigger space. A back room for readings and workshops. He asked if I'd consider hosting a finance session. Not formal, he said. Just stories. I agreed. The flyer read, Miss E, a quiet path to clarity. People came. 12 or so. Mostly women, a few younger men, a grandmother with a sharp chin who spoke in short, clipped thoughts. I didn't lecture. I just told them how I learned to read a contract. How I once signed something I didn't fully understand. How I stopped doing that. Someone asked if I was scared when I left my son's house. No, I said. Not scared. Just done. At the end, Camille handed me a small paper bag. Inside was a tiny potted lavender plant. For your windowsill, she said. To go with the basil and rosemary. That night, I placed it in the center. 3 roots. 3 chances. The past doesn't vanish. It roots itself into your habits, your responses, your silences. But over time, with care, it learns not to overgrow everything else. I still keep Mason's first letter. I still walk to the bookstore and nod to Margaret. I still boil water the slow way, not in the microwave. Some evenings, I light a candle and sit with no sound at all. And I remember what it felt like to be erased in a house full of people. Not to be hated. Just to be slowly made invisible. They thought I would disappear. But I didn't. I just stepped out of their story and into my own. The lavender survived the winter. That surprised me more than anything. I'd expected it to wilt, like so many delicate things do when the nights stretch long and cold. But it stayed upright, a little brittle, a little stubborn. I understood that. Mason stopped by one Sunday with a brown paper parcel under his arm. Inside, a framed photo of the 3 potted plants on my balcony, basil, rosemary, lavender. He'd taken it in the late morning light, and somehow the angle caught the shadow of the chair beside them. The empty chair. My chair. I wanted you to have something, he said. To remember this part. I thanked him. We didn't need more words than that. We sat for a while. He with his sketchbook. Me with my tea. The breeze carried a faint scent of orange peels from someone's breakfast downstairs. I might leave Charleston after graduation, he said, not looking up. Where to? Not sure yet. Somewhere smaller, maybe. Or bigger. I think I want to find a place that doesn't already know me. I nodded. It helps. He glanced over. I won't disappear though. I know. When he left, I stood by the door for a long time, looking at the space he had filled, then emptied. Not with sadness. Just awareness. He was growing toward himself. Not away from me. Later that evening, I found myself folding an old sweater, one I hadn't worn in years. The fabric had thinned, but the scent of cedar lingered from the storage box. I folded it gently, placed it in a donation bag. Some things you carry forward. Others, you release. I visited the cafe one morning before it opened. Theo was wiping down the new counter, taller, smoother, and set with handmade tiles that Camille had helped choose. She was in the back kitchen, humming to herself, the way I used to when ironing or peeling apples. I sat at the corner table. Theo brought over a cup of coffee. On the house. Don't start that, I said. I won't drink it. He laughed and left the bill on the table anyway. A quiet act of respect. A few women from the shelter came in around 9. One waved. One nodded. One sat near the back with a laptop, her posture steady in a way that spoke of decisions recently made. They were building lives again, not perfect ones, not clean ones, but theirs. Mine wasn't perfect either. It was uneven in places. Certain memories still knotted up when I passed certain streets or heard a voice too much like Jason's. But the weight had changed. I was no longer holding it for them. I was holding it as a reminder of what I had survived without turning bitter. That afternoon, I sat on my balcony as the sun moved slowly across the wall. The plants were doing fine. The teacup steamed softly on the railing. From inside, the soft tick of the kitchen clock reminded me that time was passing, as it always did, without regard for regret or apology. I pulled my notebook from the drawer. The last page was blank. I wrote 3 words. Still quietly here. And that was enough.